Okay, so tonight's meeting might be fairly brief depending on how things go. I really just wanted to give a quick review and kind of prepare for the big project coming up this weekend, which will be the synthesis um, design prototype. As far as announcements for the class, I'm working on the week 3 projects, and I've gotten through most of those. I have a handful left, and I'm going to wrap those up tonight. And no exploration this week, but don't forget to look at the professionalism assignment because there is a reflection video attached to that is occasionally overlooked. So be sure to take a look at that. Otherwise, we are looking at the final project that is kind of the culmination of everything we've been doing this month. Are there any questions or anything I could clear up really quickly? I'll have time later on for bigger questions, but is there anything that I can clarify right now? Okay. So the last part of our mood board was the typefaces, and I've been looking over those, and overall they've been working pretty well. Um, just the main the the most basic guideline was to make sure that they contrast well. Some usually that would mean pairing a sans serif with a serif typeface or vice versa, using those together because then they are very distinctive from one another. I've seen a few cases actually where there were two of the same type. So I think they were both serif typefaces, but they were one was really unique enough to make them distinctive. So if that's the case, use your judgment, but just be aware of that one rule of thumb, and make sure that that style of type really matches the visual impression that you're going for. Um, we've been working on creating a personal brand so that while this is really focused on this single project, it's something that you will take with you as you move through the program, and we'll revisit. Not that it's set in stone, but it will be of value to you when you get into, especially the graphic design course, because we work closely together to kind of bridge the two courses, and you'll be creating things like business cards and kind of personal promotional material using some of these factors. So that will come back into play. So while you're welcome to change these after the course ends, start thinking about that now. And the idea is that, for one thing, if you have your personal brand, then you can promote yourself better. When you're looking to get into the career and attract clients or land a job. But also, if you can brand yourself, then you can better brand someone else or someone's business, and so you'll have some experience in that area. And again, typefaces are a part of the personality. We think of brands as being the logo, but it's far more than just the logo. If you're looking at these images, we see the Burger King logo, but it's tiny, and that's hardly the recognizable aspect of that. Even if that wasn't there, you would probably know this is Burger King because of the colors and the typeface and the style of the design. And that's carried through. So I think there was one submission for the mood board that did use a display type, which is the really unique specialized typeface. And if you're really consistent in using those recognizable typefaces, it becomes ingrained, like we see with Coca-Cola or Disney World. It doesn't matter what the typeface says, you immediately know that's the Coca-Cola lettering. So it does have a lot of value. and can carry a lot of weight. And probably no questions, but if there are, please feel free to jump in. And if we think back to week 1, the definition of media aesthetics that we were working with was the interaction of various media elements and the perceptual reaction that they inspire. So when we talk about media elements, we've covered imagery, verbal message, as in the story aspect, color, and typefaces. And so it's the interaction of all of those elements, how they all come together, that really defines the aesthetic that you're going for. You can add into that a knowledge of art history, which most of you I think are taking right now as well. Add into that factors of, say, music and audio, which you'll get into later actually with the digital audio course, kind of picks up on that and gets into the more rich media aspects of aesthetics. But all those factors working together is what influences your viewer's reaction. And all that takes planning. If you remember the Breaking Bad infographic that showed the colors for the characters, that shows you the depth of the decision making that goes in before anything is created. Because you don't want to get to the point where you're spending hours developing a video or creating advertising designs or what have you, and realize that you're heading in the wrong creative direction, and have your client or your project manager put the brakes on things. You want to have those decisions made up front, and that's what the mood board was. That's what a storyboard is in other contexts. It is that planning, it's that advanced preparation so that you're not wasting any effort and wasting any time. So now we're at a point where you've made those choices and you know the creative direction that you're going in. So now you can actually start the production. So now is when, in a professional project, you might call in your team, your graphic designers and your videographers and what have you, and start putting this creative direction into effect. In this case, you are the team. You're a one-person media team, and you're going to create a graphic. The graphic that you'll create is a poster or an advertisement, something that's showcasing your mission, your personal mission, particularly as a media professional. This is the mood board I've been using as my example. This is one of my past students. And all these factors, you can see the imagery with textures and color and just the illustration as far as the scenery and so forth. Colors and typefaces, and then I've shown you this one before, so you probably remember, and you see how it all comes together. You can see the colors represented. You can see the typefaces. This is the heading typeface and the body typeface. Or I think in this case, it might be a display type and a heading type without any actual body type appearing on there. But given the nature of this poster design, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. If there was fine detail, any kind of written message on here, I would expect that to be in the body type. So this is what we are going for. And just kind of summarize what I've basically just said. What I'm looking for you to do now is to take all of the concepts we've looked at in our explorations and apply those using the Photoshop techniques that you've learned to create something original, something new that is the embodiment of all that you've planned. I do want to see you apply some visual storytelling. So try to make it an interesting visual experience for the viewer. Apply these factors that you've been deciding on, and pay close attention to a visual hierarchy. I really want to see deliberate decision making. So, think about where you want your viewer to look first, what's most important to them in receiving your message and the impression that you're trying to give. Because remember, the visual hierarchy is kind of like the guided tour. It says look here first, and then look over here, and then take this in, so that the experience builds and they get the pieces one at a time. It really goes hand in hand with the idea of a visual story, because what happens in a story, you get events one at a time, and then it builds, and then you get the gist of it at the end, at the conclusion. And Photoshop techniques. Sometimes I'm asked if you have to apply all of the techniques you covered, or if there's specific things. And the answer is no. I'm not really looking for any specific Photoshop techniques to be demonstrated. I want you to use whatever techniques you need to create a successful project. So if it's cropping an image to change what the focus is or the emphasis, or if you just want to get rid of some distracting elements, you can do that. Be careful to make sure you're not cropping it too small, because if you increase the size of an image, it's going to get blurry. It's going to get very pixelated. So start with a high resolution image first, and then crop it down. Most of the images on the morgue file are pretty decent resolution. You can apply the compositing techniques that we used in the last practice activity, combining elements and building up that visual story by adding in new characters or new objects, like traveling ducks. And manipulating color. And remember that color can both change the mood and emotion of your image. It can also change where the emphasis is given. So if you want to emphasize something, give it a contrasting complementary color, or take away the color and leave that object as an accent. And we didn't really practice this technique, but it is in the Linda lesson, and that's taking away something, erasing something from an image so that it doesn't look like it was manipulated. If that's something that, if you feel is needed and you're comfortable with it, try that out. The one thing that is required, though, is adding text. And so there has to be some text added in order to convey the message and the story. This probably shouldn't be too much text. So if you have a title or a name, and then a slogan or kind of a catchphrase, that would be sufficient. But really gauge that based on your particular approach. More or less might be needed. Sometimes it's just a simple, single, powerful statement is enough to really get the message across. Any thoughts so far? Any questions or ideas on how you might go about this?
I have a quick question. This is Zaina.
Sure.
So do we have to, I guess, layer images together? Can it just be one image and add text, or did you want us to use that Photoshop technique where we take two photos and kind of blend them together?
It can just be a single photo if you have a single photo that is sufficient, that does the job. Yeah, so again, that's up to you. Like what Photoshop techniques you use is completely up to you. Whatever you need to get this job done.
Thank you.
Sure. But of course, that can lead to interesting results if you do use that compositing or layering technique. These are some of the examples I shared. These are both linked under the assignment as well, but this is a past student. Um, and this is actually a composited image with the kind of a ripping effect, which I thought was really interesting and well done. But so you can see that there's a lot of power in using that technique. This one is more of a graphic approach where he has just sort of done a minimalist graphic design style, and so using color manipulation and the saturation and or brightness and contrast and so forth to make that happen, and slowly building up a collection of samples to show. But those are a couple. These use some pretty complex Photoshop, but again, it doesn't have to be extremely complex. It can be just some simple manipulations. Um, but show me what you can do. Challenge yourself within limits to make sure that you can accomplish what you set out to do. But just see what you're capable of. Use this as a way of pushing your boundaries. Okay, so that was kind of the wrap up for my presentation. What I wanted to do now is kind of leave some time open if you had any questions, or if you wanted any coaching on particular Photoshop techniques that you weren't entirely comfortable with or think you might use in your project. I could do some demonstrations now if you'd like. Or if you're feeling pretty comfortable with things, then I'd be happy to let you go and get started. Do you have to use the same typefaces? You can alter your typefaces, um, but if you do make changes to the typefaces or to the color palette, go ahead and change those in your mood board as well. Because the idea here is that you're building that direction, and none of this is set in stone. Of course, if you get to the point where you're designing something and you realize this really just doesn't work, yeah, you can change that, but go ahead and change it in your style guide as well, in your mood board. Um, I had another comment on that, and my mind is going blank right now. Let's see. Oh, the colors, that's right. And just to be clear, on the colors, that those do not define all the colors you can have in your image. So if you're using a photograph that's really colorful, that's different. That's not your brand colors. The brand colors would be perhaps in your text, or if you have a logo or graphics of any kind. So you can have more colors in your photographs than what you have in your color palette. Does that make sense? Okay, and Regina, you bring up a good point as well. As far as the photos, with this project, I'm looking for you to use non-copyrighted images. So while on the image collage, you had complete freedom to go collect photos from simple Google image searches, now I want you to really pay attention to where those are coming from and what the copyright is. Morgue file is always copyright free, so those are free game. But anywhere else, then it gets a little more iffy. You can go to DeviantArt, or what's the other one? Flickr. have Creative Commons areas, but pay very close attention to what specific kind of Creative Commons license. Some of them are unrestricted, and then some of them are, still have all rights reserved. So be very mindful of that. That's just preparation for, because right now you're doing these student projects. There's pretty low possibility that you'll get into any legal trouble with these, but good habits are, it's good to build these habits early. When you get out and start doing professional work, then that's not going to go over well. You see a lot of that with, I just today actually saw an example where I think it's a Taylor Swift CD cover used artwork that they did not have the rights to. It was an artist who probably had a DeviantArt page or a Flickr page, and they just found it. And that is not legal, and is it's to be avoided. Okay, so how are you all feeling as far as Photoshop goes? Do you feel like this is within your reach, or do you need some extra um, tips and tricks or clarification?
Hi, this is Zaina again. Like, is there any way that you could do a quick like blending tutorial on Photoshop?
I could. But just to clarify, what kind of blending do you mean?
Blending of two images, kind of like the first example that you gave us of the student. How she had the, yeah,
Okay,
that one.
here. Sure. I wanted to demonstrate a couple of Photoshop techniques that came up during our go-to session. What I have open right now is I have Photoshop here, and I have a couple of photographs layered on top of each other, and these are completely unrelated. They're just arbitrary pictures that I opened. But the question was, how do um, you transition from one to another or blend photos? And there's a couple of different ways. The one that I demonstrated was to I use the lasso tool. You can use any selection tool you want. Lasso lets you be a little more freeform, and you can kind of do a ripping effect down the middle, and then just make sure you get the rest of the photo. And you can see I went out of the lines a little bit down here, so I'm going to hold my shift key and just grab that. Shift key lets you add to your selection. So now I've got this sort of tear. I've got the left side selected, the right side is unselected, with a very uneven division down the middle. So if I do from here, if I hit the layer mask button down below the list of layers, what that will do is hide everything that's not in that selection. So you see now that right side that was outside of the selection is now hidden. So now there's this rough transition from one image to the other. And there's a few different things you could do to really make that look interesting. You could double click the layer and add a drop shadow. And move this out of the way so you can see what's going on. So you can see that it looks like almost as if two photographs are actually laying on top of each other in 3 dimensions. And you can adjust the look of that shadow, make it larger, more blurry, and so forth, and that really increases the sense of the distance between the two layers. So this is one technique you can do, and there's a lot of different things you could do with that, playing with some of the filters and so forth. Or let's see, I'm going to take the drop shadow off and instead you do, no, that's not really working, but do sort of a bevel or emboss sort of effect, which just kind of makes it look like these are almost three-dimensional chunks, which not really crazy about that. Glow effect. So that's really just kind of adding an outline. But in Photoshop, there's really no single way to go about any given thing. So you can really take any number of directions in achieving a particular effect. I think I'm too high resolution for the blur to really be visible. Okay, so so this is one approach. Another one that I was trying to demonstrate in class, but I was forgetting a step, and that is to make a more gradual transition. Say if you wanted one photograph to slowly fade into another. You'll use the layer mask again, but this time I'm not going to make a selection, and I'm just going to apply the layer mask. And then using my gradient tool, I'm going to draw a gradient. And a gradient is basically a fade from one color to another normally, but since I have the layer mask on there, it's going to fade into the mask. So instead of being a hard edge where it's cut off, it's going to be gradual. So if I draw that across, you can see that there's sort of that blurring or gradual transition. And I just hit undo, so Command Z. And if I draw that line very small, it's going to be more of a hard edge. But now you can still see the blur. Let me undo that again. And if I did a really long gradient, then it's more of a gradual transition. So that's an approach you can do. So just to go back over that, it is add your images on top of each other, add a layer mask, and then use the gradient tool. Also notice that the direction of my gradient affects how that transition takes place. So you can create some really interesting things. Here's something. Actually, I'm going to delete this layer. It's an interesting effect that I've seen done with this. So I just want the pig races, and I'm going to duplicate the pig races. So now I've just got two copies of the same image. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove all the color from this top layer. I'm going to add my adjustment layer with the saturation and hue, and I'm just going to drop the saturation down so now it's black and white. Okay, so now I have a black and white layer. Actually, let me do this. I'm going to right click, and this button right here, what I did was I double clicked the space to open up the adjustment layer. So now it only affects the layer below it. So now that black and white applies to the copy. So what I can do is now I'm going to add a layer mask. So now I've got a layer mask on that adjustment layer. No, I have to get down here to this one. To the copy, it won't apply to the adjustment layer. Okay, now I've applied the layer mask. And so you can have a gradual transition from black and white to color, or from color to black and white. And that can create some interesting symbolic effects. Or you can, it doesn't have to be black and white. It can be different color combinations or what have you. So just because I kind of stumbled a little bit, let me demonstrate that again. I'm going to delete that layer and delete the layer mask. So now I'm back to 2 layers. So what I did was it added an adjustment layer, saturation and hue, dropped the saturation down to 0, and then clicked this this button. It's on the adjustment layer information, so that way it only affects one layer. Otherwise, it would affect everything below it. And now I will go back to the pigs, add the layer mask, and make that transition. I remember an interesting project that used this same technique. Had the theme was that how music can bring color to your life, and it had a person walking across a field carrying a guitar and has kind of had the color come into the picture as the person was moving through. So some interesting symbolic themes you can do with that. So hopefully this gives something to work with if any of this is new. But let me know if you do have any other questions or anything that needs to be clarified.